Every village has its keepers of memory, its storytellers, and its quiet leaders. For Traoré, they were not shadows at the margins but figures who carved the earliest lines of his destiny. Among them was an elder revered by all, a man who carried the authority of tradition. Beneath the vast baobab tree, disputes were brought before him, and his slow, deliberate words dissolved tensions that might have torn families apart. To the children, they were simple gatherings. To young Traoré, they were a school of justice. From those silent hours of observation, he learned that true power was not measured by force, but by the ability to preserve balance. The village teacher was another such figure. He owned little, his books were worn, his blackboard cracked, yet in the eyes of children, he opened the doorway to a wider world. He taught letters and numbers, but more importantly, he told them the stories of their ancestors, warriors who defended their land, sages who guided their people, guardians who kept traditions alive. Again and again, he reminded them that learning was not about abandoning roots, but about protecting them in new ways. On hot afternoons, when the classroom fell silent as the teacher spoke, a seed took root in Traoré's mind. Knowledge, too, was a weapon, one that could shape the destiny of a nation. There was also the community leader, a man whose strength was not in commands but in connection. When harvests failed, he organized collective work so no family went hungry. When drought dragged on, he gathered the villagers and reminded them that unity was the only path to survival. Traoré watched carefully, realizing that true leadership was not about standing above others, but walking beside them, sharing burdens, and earning trust. These people became the first architects of his worldview. From them, he absorbed three core values: justice, knowledge, and communal spirit. The seeds sown in those early years would later bloom in every speech he gave, every decision he made. When he called for national unity, one could hear the echo of the elder's voice beneath the baobab. When he spoke of dignity and sovereignty, the cadence of the village teacher lived in his tone. When he urged his people to endure hardship together, the echo of the community leader's rallying cry returned. But mentors alone do not make a leader. The rest of the story was written in his own childhood, in the games played beneath the sun, in the chores that tested his resilience, and in the ordinary moments that revealed unexpected talents. To understand the man he would become, we must step into the world of his youth, where laughter and hardship intertwined, and where the first sparks of destiny began to burn. Children in the village grew up with both freedom and responsibility. Days often began with simple games, chasing one another across dusty fields, fashioning makeshift toys from sticks and stones, staging mock battles with the creativity only a child's mind could summon. Yet even in play, something about Traoré stood apart. He often took on the role of organizer, the one who settled arguments when the game grew too rough, the one who reminded the others to include the younger children, the one who ensured fairness. In small ways, leadership was already woven into his instinct. But playtime was only a brief escape. Chores came early in life. The boys of the village were expected to help with herding goats, tending small patches of crops, and carrying water when needed. These tasks were not merely physical labor. They were training in endurance, patience, and responsibility. Traoré learned to endure long walks under the sun, to make decisions when the herd scattered, to work with his peers to lift loads heavier than any one child could bear alone. These were the crucibles in which his resilience was tested. There were also quieter talents that began to surface. Villagers later recalled how he had an unusual fascination with storytelling, often retelling the folk tales he had heard from elders, but reshaping them in his own words, adding details, drawing lessons. He was not merely repeating stories. He was learning how narratives could inspire, warn, and unite people. That gift, unnoticed at first, would later echo in the speeches that rallied a nation. And then there were the pivotal experiences, the moments that lit the fire of public service. Once, during a severe drought, when families worried about whether the crops would survive, the village organized collective efforts to dig deeper wells. Traoré, though still a boy, worked tirelessly alongside adults. He carried smaller buckets of water, fetched tools, and encouraged the other children to help, rather than hide from the hard work. In that moment, he saw what it meant to act not for oneself, but for the survival of all. That sense of shared responsibility, born from sweat and struggle, would never leave him. It was within these chronicles of youth that the path of a future leader quietly began to take shape. The laughter of childhood games, the sweat of daily tasks, the spark of creativity in retelling stories, and the shared hardship of communal struggle all fused into a foundation. From these fragments of memory emerged the early flame of a man who would one day stand before a nation, ready to guide it through storms. Culture was not an accessory in Traoré's upbringing. It was the invisible thread woven through every moment of his childhood. In the village, traditions were not something to be studied. They were lived, breathed, and carried forward in every ritual, every gathering, every whispered tale at night. To grow up there was to grow up inside a tapestry of belief, where ancestral wisdom was as present as the red earth beneath his feet. Evenings often carried the sound of drums and chants rising into the air, signaling rituals that bound the community together. These were not mere performances. They were reaffirmations of identity, connecting the living to those who had come before. Around the fire, elders told stories that stretched back generations, tales of hardship and triumph, of spirits that guarded the land, of ancestors who had sacrificed so their descendants might endure. Young Traoré listened with wide eyes, realizing that these were not just stories but lessons, reminders of resilience, of dignity, of the unbreakable bond between people and their land. From such traditions, a moral compass began to form. The values of honesty, respect for elders, and duty to the community were not abstract concepts, but rules of survival. In a society where the failure of one could endanger all, collective responsibility became the highest principle. Traoré absorbed these lessons deeply, and they became part of the ethical framework that still guides him today. It was also in folklore that he found vision. The myths of heroes who rose from obscurity to defend their people resonated with him. These stories were less about magic than about courage, the courage to stand when others faltered, to speak when silence seemed safer. In those narratives, he saw reflections of what a leader must be, and perhaps without realizing it, he began to imagine that such a path might one day be his. Religion and spirituality, too, were constant presences. The rhythms of prayer, the invocations for rain, the blessings before harvest, all reminded him that human effort was always intertwined with forces greater than oneself. For Traoré, this did not breed passivity, but humility, the sense that even the strongest leader remains only a steward, never the master, of destiny. Years later, when he would take bold political stances, rejecting foreign domination and calling for the rebirth of his nation's dignity, observers might see only the fiery rhetoric of a soldier turned president. But beneath those words lived the quiet echoes of his upbringing, the elders' stories around the fire, the rituals that tied people to their land, the folklore that taught courage. His policies were not inventions of ambition, they were extensions of cultural memory. And as Burkina Faso now struggles with crises of security, poverty, and global pressure, it is precisely this cultural foundation that gives his leadership both its strength and its defiance. His vision of governance is not imported. It is born from the soil of his village, from the voices of his ancestors, from the enduring belief that a nation can only stand tall if it remembers who it is. Yet to see the full arc of this journey, one must trace the line from those roots to the stage of national politics. The village did not vanish when Traoré stepped into power. It traveled with him, shaping the way he governs, the way he speaks, the way he imagines the future. The unseen bond between his origins and his presidency is not only personal, it is the key to understanding the choices he makes today. When Ibrahim Traoré stands before his nation today, the world sees a president in military attire, a man who speaks of sovereignty, unity, and the fight against foreign domination. But what the cameras often fail to capture is the quiet village that still lives within him. The path from red earth to marble halls was long, but the lessons carried along that road never left his side. In his speeches, one can hear the echo of the elder beneath the baobab tree. When he insists on fairness in negotiations or calls out injustice from stronger nations, he is not merely playing politics. He is applying the justice he once witnessed as a boy. When he demands that Burkina Faso take its destiny into its own hands, one hears the voice of the teacher reminding children that knowledge and dignity are the true shields of a people. And when he rallies his citizens to endure hardship together, one can almost see the community leader organizing villagers in times of famine, binding them together through trust and resilience. Even his policies bear the imprint of the village. His emphasis on self-reliance reflects the survival strategies of rural life, where nothing could be taken for granted and every resource had to be maximized. His push for regional solidarity mirrors the communal spirit that once ensured no family starved. And his unyielding stance against external control is, at its core, the same defiance that village folklore instilled in children, the belief that dignity matters more than comfort and freedom more than compromise. Critics may argue about the risks of his decisions, about the challenges of navigating a fragile economy and a volatile security crisis. But to understand why Traoré acts as he does, one must see beyond the palace walls. His leadership is not an abstract ideology. It is the continuation of a village's way of life, amplified onto the stage of national politics. The principles of community, resilience, and cultural pride that shaped him as a boy have become the compass by which he steers a nation through turbulent waters. In many ways, his presidency is not his alone. It belongs to the village that raised him, to the mentors who guided him, to the stories that gave him courage. The unseen connection between his origins and his governance is not hidden. It is alive in every choice he makes, every battle he takes on, every dream he dares to voice for Burkina Faso. And so, when history looks back on Ibrahim Traoré, it may not only remember the president who challenged powerful forces or the soldier who rose to lead. It may remember the boy who listened to stories under the night sky, who carried buckets of water during drought, who played games in dusty fields, and who absorbed the wisdom of elders. It may remember the village that still beats in the heart of a nation. For in the end, the journey from village to nation is not just his story. It is the story of Burkina Faso itself, a reminder that even in the harshest soil, the roots of hope can grow strong enough to guide a people through storms and toward a horizon they can finally call their own.